Hello everyone, and welcome to video number 5 for our discussion on Dante's Inferno. In this video, we're going to continue our discussion from video number 4 about that first section in Canto 3. And you'll recall that our focus question is asking us to look at the physical description of hell, as well as the souls that Dante is going to meet there and the punishment that they are forced to endure. So we're going to look at lines 37 through 66 of Canto 3 in this video. You can find those lines on page 744 and page 745 of your literature textbook. And then I, Master, what agony is it that makes them keen their grief with so much force? He, I will make brief answer. They have no hope of death, but a blind life so abject they envy any other fate. To all memory of them, the world is deaf. Mercy and justice disdain them. Let us not speak of them. Look and pass on. I looked again. A whirling banner sped at such a rate, it seemed it might never stop. Behind it a train of souls, so long that I would not have thought death had undone so many. When more than one I recognized had passed, I beheld the shade of him who made the great refusal, impelled by cowardice. So at once I understood, beyond all doubt, that this was the dreary guild repellent both to God and his enemies. Hapless ones never alive, their bare skin galled by wasps and flies, blood trickling down the face, mingling with tears for harvest underfoot by writhing maggots. Then, when I turned my eyes, farther along our course, I could make out people upon the shore of some great river. Master, I said, it seems by this dim light that all of these are eager to cross over. Can you tell me by what law, and who they are? He answered, those are things you will discover when we have paused at Acheron's dismal shore. I walked on with my head down after that, fearful I had displeased him, and spoke no more. Let's go ahead then and dive into these first set of tercets and see exactly what Dante is saying about this Ante-Inferno, this outer chamber of hell. I just want to make a reminder for you guys, when we see Dante using a pronoun followed by a colon, he is using that in place of the name of the speaker. So here we see I is referring to himself, Dante. You'll also know that he continues to refer to Virgil as his master, so someone that he is going to follow with devotion throughout his journey in hell. Speaking of hell, Dante again gives us a better description of the type of place that this is. And just to make this note very clear, we haven't even gotten into the first circle of hell, and already Dante is describing this as a place that neither you nor I would choose willingly to go to. We see here that the souls who find themselves here keen their grief, meaning that they experience it very deeply. They wail with sadness. And he is asking Virgil then this question, what agony is causing them so much pain? What have they done to deserve this sort of punishment? We see that Virgil here is about to answer. And his answer is this, that these individuals have no hope of death, meaning that for all of eternity, they will be forced to endure this punishment. And part of this punishment is that they're going to lead a blind life. And we could analyze this perhaps on two levels. So one, a literal level, that they are blinded in death. They have lost the ability to see, but also symbolically, right? We've talked about this before in literature, that when people or authors use blindness symbolically, they mean that they are unaware of what's going on around them. They lack this intellect. And this is interesting because we understand that their primary sin is that they've lost this good of intellect, this pursuit and knowledge of who God is. And Virgil continues, so abject, they envy any other fate. And abject here meaning simply that they are so miserable in the condition they find themselves in that any other fate would be better. So remember this as we dive into, for example, in Canto number 5, when we get into the circle designated for those who've committed the sin of lust, that even the people here in this outer layer of hell would rather experience those inner circles of hell in comparison to what they're forced to endure. And part of the reason they might prefer this type of punishment, any other punishment, is this, that to all memory of them, the world is deaf. So the memory of who they are as people, who they were, is completely gone. And if you'll think back to our discussion of the Iliad, specifically with the character of Achilles, he in part joins the Trojan War precisely because he wants people to remember him after he's gone. And if we're honest with ourselves, it's something that we want as well. After we die and we're no longer here on earth, it's comforting in a sense to know that there are people, our family, our friends, who remember who we are. But this comfort is taken away from any who find themselves in this circle. So we begin to see this further punishment for what they have done in life. And we're going to begin to see, as we get further into their punishment, that it's going to take on an ironic twist. And this is going to be true of all of the punishments we see in hell, that Dante is going to take the sin they've committed and make their punishment sort of this grim mirror image of it. Virgil continues to explain that mercy and justice disdain them, and you'll recall from our last video that these concepts of mercy and justice are ones that reside in heaven and reside in God as someone who is divine. So God looks upon them and heaven looks upon them and disdains them, meaning they can't even bear to look at them. And this is interesting because even Virgil himself, a resident of hell, is commanding Dante to not even speak of them. So just as the world has forgotten who they are, let us forget who they are as well. Let us simply look at them and move along. Okay? And the last thing I want to draw your attention to is this whirling banner that we see in line 45. And this is going to be important because this whirling banner is going to be a key part of what makes their punishment so ironic. So that last terse, just make sure you understand when we talk about mercy and justice, these are representative of heaven, symbolic of God. So things that are divine, righteous, and holy look upon these people and they disdain them. And this extends to Virgil himself, and Virgil now commanding Dante as well to disdain them, to not look at them, to pass on. And we're going to get into our next set of terses in a moment. I want you to think in the meantime then, what might this whirling banner represent? We're going to turn then to our table that we're continuing to complete for Canto III. And the first thing we notice in terms of a physical description of hell is that it's completely hopeless. It's described as a place of agony and grief, and where the sense of despair that the people who occupy it feel is very heightened. Right? Remember, they keen their grief. They feel it with such intensity that it's impossible to ignore. And this brings us then to the sins that are committed and the punishment that they are given. Remember, the sinners we're talking about in this Ante-Inferno are those who have lost the good of intellect. They chose neither good nor evil in life. And their punishment now is that they have no hope of death and that they are forced to live in this eternal state of blindness. And this is where we come to the irony. So just as they chose to be blind to the choices before them, this choice of either good or evil, in hell they're going to be eternally punished with this same blindness. And this is going to cause them to envy the punishment of others. Additionally, we see that the world is going to forget them entirely, and this is because they are meant to be forgotten. And remember, as Virgil is encouraging Dante to do this, to ignore them, we need to remember that Dante is representative of humanity, specifically in terms of Dante the Pilgrim, and he's drawing us into this journey with him. So as Dante the Pilgrim is experiencing all of these circles and layers of hell, Dante the poet is asking us to reflect on our own life and to experience this with him. Returning then to our next set of tercets, just a quick reminder, this "it" is referring to the whirling banner that we discussed previously. And Dante is now commenting that this banner is constantly moving, it never stops. And similarly, there is a long train or line of souls, those who are condemned to the Ante-Inferno, who also are forced to follow it. And so many, in fact, that Dante comments he couldn't even have perceived that death would have claimed so many people. So we're going to get now into discussing what this whirling banner might represent. And as we begin to think about that, we need to remember two things. So one, every single punishment in hell, starting from this canto, is going to be an ironic twist of the sin they have committed. But additionally, I need to then focus on what is the literal description being given. I'm going to combine those two things. So my knowledge of the sin they have committed and the fact that the punishment is going to be an ironic twist of that, with also looking at physically, literally, what is their punishment described as being. So here I need to understand that these people are forced to constantly continue to move. They are forced not to stop. And this is entirely an image that should be scary for us, not only because their control, their choice has been taken away from them, but also that so many find themselves here, that so many on earth have committed this sin of choosing neither good or evil. We're going to remember that Dante is also, as the poet, commenting on the life that he saw around him. So perhaps this is also a commentary on the fact that Dante perceives those around him in terms of this conflict existing within Florence against the black Guelphs and the white Guelphs as choosing neither side, as choosing to remain neutral, and hence condemning themselves. Additionally, we see, and this sort of upholds the fact we were talking that Dante is sharing about his own personal experience, that he recognizes many who pass. So these people who walk before him, he knows them. And we understand that Dante, the poet, lived in Florence. So he's going to be speaking then about people who also are from that city-state within Italy. And he's going to say next that he beholds a shade, so meaning he looks upon a ghost, this figure, who is guilty of this great refusal. Note here that we have the capitalization of great and refusal, so we understand that this is a proper noun, and that this great refusal is impelled or driven or caused by cowardice. And this is important for a few things. So one, Dante is going to see people he knows. We know that he's from Florence, so hence they also must be from Florence. And this is going to get me to that great refusal. I know that because this is capitalized, I'm referring not then to an action, but to a person, this proper noun. And historically, this person is thought to be Pope Celestine V. And he's an important figure because he is the Pope in control of Florence prior to Pope Boniface VIII. And he is only in his position for about 5 months when all of the political pressures surrounding him are too much, and he simply gives up his title, and he makes way for Pope Boniface VIII to come. And as we all know, Pope Boniface VIII's position within Florence directly causes Dante's exile. So, of course, Dante is going to look upon Pope Celestine V's refusal to take action, and this choice that he makes neither to stay within his position and to choose a stance of goodness or to be swept into the pull, the allure of the corruption of power that we see Pope Boniface VIII being dragged into. So this is why Pope Celestine V finds himself here within this section, this outer layer of hell. We're going to turn then to our final tercet. And just a reminder, when we talk about guild, remember back to our discussion of the late Middle Ages and these guilds as being groups of people who are combining their forces because they are good at some particular skill, this particular talent, and they share their knowledge. So ironically now, these people are forming a guild of their own within hell. And this guild or this group is repellent or disgusting both to God and to his enemies, meaning to hell. Again, referencing our earlier discussion for the first section of Canto III, that hell does not want these people with them because it will cause those who actually find themselves in hell to be able to have pride in the fact that they are more evil than them, but also that heaven rejects them because they lack this sense of righteousness and goodness that's needed. And they're continued to be described here as hapless ones, meaning those who are unfortunate. And we see first they're unfortunate because their skin is being galled, meaning to be made broken or to have these sores. And before we get into our next slide, I want to draw your attention to the fact that Dante now understands the nature of this circle of, well, not circle of hell really, but this outer layer of hell. And this is going to be important because along the way, Dante is going to need to come to this point of realization. You're following along then with your table. One thing that we can add in terms of this physical description of hell is that it's a place of endless torture. It's extremely well populated, and the people within it are well aware of the fact that they're being tortured. Turning then to the sins committed and punishment inflicted. Remember, the sin committed here is this loss of the good of intellect. And the punishment they are given is they are forced to move continuously and to follow this whirling banner. And this is ironic because remember, they choose not to make a choice in life. And in hell, this choice is made for them, and they're forced to follow this whirling banner. And again, that historical figure that we're associating with this portion of hell is Pope Celestine V. We're going to get further now into understanding what exactly their punishment looks like. And this punishment is completely horrendous. Right? They're constantly being attacked by wasps and flies, so much so that blood is trickling in reams down their face and mixing with the tears that they're crying. So they're in complete and utter agony. And not only that, they're also forced to walk on maggots, who we know, if we're thinking from a biological standpoint, are only present in things that are decaying or that have already died. And then we jump to this next tercet, and we see that Dante looks in the distance and he beholds this great river. And this is going to be important because this is one of 3 rivers that Dante and Virgil are going to encounter in hell. And you'll recall that this number 3 is important to Dante. We see it recurring here. And I also highlighted this line of this dim light because I want us all to remember that hell, as it's described by Dante, is going to lack light. And this is important because light is used throughout the Divine Comedy as this symbol of God. So the presence of God is entirely lacking in hell. And Dante is going to then look upon those people and see that they are eager to cross over this river to some other side. And he's going to ask what law compels them to go, and who are these people? And this is important because we're talking about people now who are different than those who've committed this sin of the loss of the good of intellect. But also we understand then that hell is bound by certain rules. There's laws they have to follow. I'm going to jump back then to our table. And I want to talk for a moment about this first river that we see within hell, this river Acheron. In Greek and Roman mythology, this river is specifically one of sorrow or woe. And this is important because the very first river we encounter in crossing into hell is going to be characterized by pain, by sadness. And also historically, this river is manned by a figure who we're going to get into in our next video. And he ferries the dead into the underworld in Greek mythology. So, hint, hint, Dante is taking this role this figure has in Greek and Roman mythology and placing them in the same position within his Inferno. Jumping back then to the punishment, again, we see this sense of irony. They're constantly driven by movement of pain. These wasps and flies and maggots are urging them forward, so they're forced to make a movement in death that they never made in life. Then the last few lines we're going to talk about for this video. I just want to bring your attention to the fact that, again, this river is described as a dismal shore, so we shouldn't expect anything pleasant on the other side of it. But also we see again, Dante's fear emerging. And this is important because Virgil has warned Dante, leave your fear aside. Don't bring it with you. But we see that Dante hasn't been able to do this. And he's very much concerned with how Virgil sees him. And this is going to be true for a majority of their journey together. Jumping back then to our physical description of how we continue to see the river being described, and again, at the other end of the river is going to be nothing pleasant. And then turning to our last discussion of the sins committed and punishment inflicted. There's no further discussion of the specific sinners, but I want to draw your attention again to that interesting response from Dante. So he longs for approval from Virgil, perhaps. That might be one way of interpreting the fact that he holds his head down in shame and he is so fearful of the fact that he perhaps has displeased him. And also we have evidence to show that Dante, again, has not heeded Virgil's command, that he brings his fear and he brings his cowardice with him into the depths of hell. And we want to think or perhaps predict what sort of problems might this cause Dante. That's it for video number 5. In video number 6, we're going to get through the rest of Canto 3, where we will meet Acheron, that ferryman of hell that I was alluding to a moment ago. So please make sure that you download the worksheet for video number 6. You can follow the link to that on lesson. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.